You'd think by now I'd know better than to answer the door. Fritz gets downright fidgety if someone rings during lunch prep, and Wolfe, of course, treats interruptions like a personal insult. From the cosmos, but on that particular Wednesday gray-skied, with a spring drizzle slicking West 35th, I opened the front door to a woman who looked like a silk-gloved mystery wrapped in a Chanel overcoat. "Is this the residence of Mr. Nero Wolfe?" she asked, her voice smooth and faintly accented. "French, maybe, or the kind of upper-crust boarding school accent you only hear in glossy magazine ads. And murder trials." "It is," I said, already stepping aside. "And unless you're selling encyclopedias or insurance, I'm guessing you want to speak with him." She moved like someone who knew she'd never needed to knock on a door twice in her life. Her heels tapped across the marble floor, and her perfume trailed behind her like a rumor, expensive and evasive. I led her into the front room. "Name?" I asked, before I buzzed the intercom. "Celeste Varney," she said. She took off her gloves like she was peeling secrets. "I work in wine, don't we all?" I muttered, and buzzed the intercom. "Client, sir. Celeste Varney. She works in wine." A pause. Wolfe doesn't like enophiles unless they're willing to defer to his encyclopedic superiority. "Bring her in," came the reluctant reply. In the office, Wolfe was already seated behind his desk, a mountain of a man in his mustard-colored robe, with one hand lazily reaching toward the orchid schedule. He glanced at her, then at me. "She works in wine," I said again, helpfully. "I figured that might nudge you into civility." "I am always civil," Wolfe muttered. "Miss Varney, sit." "What sort of wine?" She sat, crossed her legs, sat, her purse small, black, lethal looking on her lap. "I am the sommelier at La Cuvée, on 81st. Perhaps you know it." "I know of it," Wolfe said. "Its chef is a fraud and its sauces are an abomination. But its cellar, I'm told, is competent." She smiled like she'd expected worse. "It was more than competent last week, until someone died." Wolfe raised a brow, but not his whole head. "Did someone choke on a bad vintage? I'm not here for jokes." "Mr. Wolfe, then you are in the wrong house," I muttered, flopping onto the red chair beside the globe. "We run on sarcasm and suspicion here." Celeste turned to Wolfe, her tone tightening. "Last Friday, a man named Leland Montrose died at one of our private tables. Heart attack. The medical examiner said. But something's wrong." "Wrong how?" Wolfe asked. "I served him," she said. "The wine he ordered, Château Latour, 1953. I decanted it myself. I checked the label twice, but the moment I smelled it, I knew it wasn't right. The bouquet was off. Titanic. Tara. It had never seen 1953. I told the manager, but he brushed it off." Then, 10 minutes later, Montrose slumped forward, dead over his steak frites. I scratched my jaw. "And you think the wine killed him?" She looked me dead in the eye. "I think someone meant for him to die, and that bottle didn't come from our cellar." Wolfe sighed, the kind of sigh he reserves for cases that smell like ambition more than danger. "Miss Varney, if you are asking me to prove a forgery in wine labeling, or to locate a counterfeit bottle, I suggest you speak to a collector or sommelier society. I'm not asking you to chase corks," she said. "I'm asking you to look into a murder, and the police, they don't care. The autopsy showed cardiac arrest, no poison, no signs of trauma, and Montrose was 68, with a record of stress and blood pressure problems." Then Wolfe said, folding his hands, "Why are you here?" Celeste hesitated, as though tasting her next words before saying them. "Because the bottle didn't come from us, because it was switched, and because Leland Montrose had enemies, people with money and reason and power, and because, since his death, someone's been following me." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small black velvet bag. Inside was a cork. She handed it to me like it was evidence. "I kept it," she said. "I know wine, Mr. Wolfe. I know it better than anyone in that restaurant, and I know that bottle wasn't ours. It was planted, and if I'm right, then someone went to a lot of trouble to kill Leland Montrose and make it look natural." Wolfe stared at the cork like it might confess if he waited long enough. "Phooey," he said finally. "A bottle, a rumor, a death, certified as natural. There's no case here, Miss Varney." Celeste stood, slowly. I understand. She said, I'll find someone else. But as she turned, Wolfe spoke again, this time with faint irritation. What varietal did you say it was? Cabernet Sauvignon, she said. Latour, as I said. But the acid balance was wrong. Too much bite. Young and brash, I'd guess. A 95, maybe a 96. Someone relabeled it. And the bottle itself, Wolfe asked. Any tampering? It was flawless. Whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. I could see Wolfe squirming inside. If there's one thing he can't abide, it's someone using brilliance in the service of lies, especially involving gastronomy. But he only nodded. Good day, Miss Varney. She left with the same grace she entered, and when the door shut, I turned to Wolfe. You're not biting. She has no proof, only her nose. You've accepted cases on less, and you hate wine frauds more than counterfeiters. Remember that Italian importer who faked the Barolos? Wolfe grunted. She's scared, I said. And she's got something else spied. That wasn't a pitch, it was a warning. Wolfe was already reaching for the orchid schedule again, but I saw it. That twitch of a brow. That reluctant, grumbling flicker of interest. The hook was set. It just hadn't tugged yet. The next morning, Nero Wolfe was in a foul mood. That in itself isn't news. Wolfe is in a foul mood the way Times Square is loud or a pastrami sandwich is messy. It's baked into the experience. But this was a particular flavor of sour. Something between mild affront and intellectual constipation. He'd barely spoken a word since breakfast, except to grumble at Fritz about the tarragon level in the Bernays, which, for the record, was perfect. I'd spent the morning in the front room with a copy of the Gazette and a gnawing sense that our little wine mystery wasn't going to decant itself. At 11:15. I couldn't stand it any longer. Are you really going to pretend she didn't walk in here and pour a perfectly vintage hook right into your glass? I asked. Wolfe didn't look up from Les Orchidées Exotiques. She brought no case. She brought a death, a swapped bottle, and what I'd classify as an extremely classy panic. She brought a cork, Wolfe corrected, and a suspicion. Born of arrogance. You don't think she knew her stuff? He sighed long, operatic. The kind of sigh that should have been scored by violins. Of course she did. But that does not make it murder. I leaned forward, putting down the paper. What if it is? Wolfe turned the page delicately. Then someone else will investigate it. Preferably someone with a badge, or at the very least, a tolerance for interruptions. You know the cops won't touch it. Natural causes, no poison. No trauma, no scandal. But something smells. You are extrapolating based on pheromones and accent. Maybe, I said. But Celeste Varney didn't strike me as the theatrical type. And you heard what she said. Leland Montrose had enemies. Big ones. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Everyone has enemies, Mr. Goodwin. But not everyone is murdered with Cabernet Sauvignon. I sat back and crossed my legs. Okay, fine. Let's talk about that wine. You know anyone besides Fritz who could pull off a perfect counterfeit? Label, cork, age trick, everything. I know 3, Wolfe said, still not looking up. One is dead. One is in federal prison. The third is in Burgundy and would never waste a Château Latour on a stockbroker. Montrose was a stockbroker, retired, Wolfe muttered. You forget I read obituaries. Touching. I said. So we've got a wealthy, retired finance man with a long list of enemies, a swapped bottle of fake vintage wine, and a sommelier who's scared she's being followed. But no case, Wolfe said. No client, no fee, no cause. I got up and walked to the bookshelves, just a pace. Sometimes he caves if you move around enough. You ever heard of Montrose before this? No, Wolfe admitted. Because I have. I remembered after she left yesterday. He was involved in that offshore tax evasion mess 2 years ago. Senate hearings, Cayman Islands, the whole performance. But he vanished off the radar when the feds dropped the charges. Retired, supposedly. That got his attention. His gaze lifted, just slightly. And you believe this connects? I don't know, I said. But it's a long way from nothing. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed the orchid book with a soft thump. He stared at the ceiling as if he expected it to crack open and drop down a clue. If you wish to amuse yourself, inquire, but do not engage anyone on my behalf. We are not taking the case. That was as close to permission as I was going to get. Fritz, I called, already grabbing my coat. Tell our reluctant orchid. Wrangler, I'll be back before dinner. Unless I'm murdered by a grape stomper. Wolfe grunted, which meant I had exactly 1 inch of rope and he'd blame me if I hung myself with it. I took a cab uptown to La Cuvée, the kind of place where even the flower arrangements look like they've got a private account at. Bergdorf's, marble floors, glass chandeliers, and a maitre d' with a spine so straight it probably had a warranty. Good afternoon, he said with crisp disdain. Do you have a reservation? No. But I'm not here to eat, I replied. Archie Goodwin. I'm looking for Celeste Varney. His smile was carved from granite. Miss Varney is not on the floor today. Day off? No, monsieur. She is unavailable. Unavailable how? The smile shrank. She called in sick, quite suddenly. That twisted something in my gut. I pulled out a business card and slid it onto the podium. If she contacts you, tell her I'm looking for her, urgently. The maitre d' gave a single nod. Understood. Outside, the drizzle had turned into an honest rain. I stood under the awning and dialed her number from my notebook. It rang 5 times, then voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Nothing. By 4 o'clock. I'd checked the usual haunts: her apartment building where the doorman hadn't seen her since Tuesday, a wine shop on the Upper West Side that she was rumored to frequent, and a cafe in Chelsea where I found a waitress who remembered her but hadn't seen her in days. By 5:30, I was back at the brownstone. Wolfe looked up as I entered, drenched and dripping on the floor. You are wet, he observed. Glad you noticed. And she's vanished, I said, peeling off the coat. Didn't show up to work. No answer at her place, nothing. Wolfe tilted his head. Perhaps she is avoiding you. Maybe. Or maybe someone who knows she suspected something is making sure she doesn't keep suspecting it. He closed his eyes for a moment. I have no interest in conjecture. But you do have interest in rare, impossible wine frauds and missing sommeliers. Don't tell me otherwise. He opened his eyes and looked directly at me for the first time all day. You are pushing, and you are resisting, I said, which means you're thinking. And if you're thinking, it means the case exists. You just haven't admitted it yet. Wolfe grunted and rang for Fritz. I didn't smile, but I felt the wind in my bones. He wasn't going to say it aloud, but Wolfe was in. I woke up the next morning to Fritz tapping lightly on my door. Mr. Goodwin, he said, his voice soft. There's something on the morning news you'll want to see. That phrase, coming from Fritz, was not casual. The man didn't dabble in drama. He didn't even like loud commercials. So when he walked in and turned on the set in the corner of the room, I rubbed my eyes, expecting politics, weather, maybe a culinary scandal. What I got was a grainy exterior shot of a brownstone near Riverside Drive, and the words at the bottom of the screen: sommelier found dead in apartment, foul play suspected. My stomach dropped. The reporter stood outside a familiar building. I'd just been there yesterday. Police were called early this morning after neighbors reported a strong odor coming from the unit of Celeste Varney, a well-known sommelier at La Cuvée restaurant. Authorities confirmed the presence of a body, and sources say preliminary signs point to poisoning, though toxicology reports are pending. Turn it off, I said. Fritz clicked the dial with a quiet snap and left me to get dressed. Wolfe didn't comment when I came down. He was already in the plant room, tending to his orchids like they were precious diplomats. When I gave him the news, he didn't stop, but I saw the slight hesitation in his thumb as it brushed a petal. Murder. Then, he said, looks like it. Phooey, now it's a matter for the police. We are not involved. You're unbelievable, I said. Hands on hips. She came to us. She was scared. She handed you a cork with more conviction than most prosecutors bring to court. And now she's dead. She did not retain me. She did not offer payment. And she presented no evidence. I paced to the window and stared out at the drizzle slick sidewalk. You're seriously going to let this one pass? Wolfe turned to face me fully. A rare occurrence outside the dining room. Do not bait me, Mr. Goodwin. I do not enjoy being baited. She was murdered, Wolfe. Then the police will investigate. And if they chalk it up to suicide or an accident, what then? He didn't answer. Fine, I said. Then, I'm doing it. I'll poke around without your blessing. And if I fall off a wine rack and break my neck, you can have the satisfaction of saying, I told you so to the coroner. He grunted. Your melodrama is unappetizing. Glad. I don't season your eggs. I headed first to the precinct. No small feat. Since the moment I walked in, I was greeted with the familiar stench of paper coffee cups, wet leather, and bureaucracy. I asked for Lieutenant Rochliff. I'd have preferred someone less allergic to me, but Rochliff had the case. He came out of his office like a man whose coffee had just been replaced with dishwater. Goodwin, what pit did you crawl out of this time? I like you too, I said. Tell me about Celeste Varney. Rochliff crossed his arms. Why? Because she came to see my employer 2 days ago. Said she thought someone was murdered with a wine swap. Now she's dead. That's 2 corpses in less than a week connected to a single bottle. He blinked, but didn't react beyond a sneer. Nice story. Doesn't mean squat. No forced entry. No sign of struggle. Talk screens pending, but we're not holding our breath. What about the smell the neighbors noticed? Rot, he said. She'd been dead for more than a day, found face down in her living room. Half a glass of wine on the table, uncorked bottle beside it. Guess what it was? Don't make me, I said. Château Latour, 1953. That hit me like a jab in the ribs. Real, we're checking. You still think that's coincidence? He smirked. Goodwin, you think everything's murder until someone proves otherwise. And you think everything's a shrug until a confession drops in your lap. Rochliff leaned closer. Unless Wolfe's got a client, and I mean a real one. Not some panicked socialite tell him to stay out of it. Last time you got involved, my paperwork tripled. I left before I said something decorative and career-limiting. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was at his desk with a sandwich, half a bottle of beer, and the most infuriatingly calm expression this side of Buddha. She's been dead at least a day, I reported, which means she was killed right after leaving us. Same wine involved, same MO. You still think it's a coincidence? I think, Wolfe said slowly, that someone is curating a narrative, and doing so rather sloppily. I sat. How? So a bottle is swapped. A man dies. Then the sommelier who noticed the swap dies too. And again, no direct violence, no break-ins, no theatricality. So what are they doing? Orchestrating. He tapped his fingers against the blotter. You recall what she said, that someone had been following her. Yeah. I checked the street outside her apartment yesterday. Nothing obvious. She wasn't followed, Wolfe said. She was monitored, which suggests forethought. So what now? Wolfe exhaled through his nose. Now we inform Mr. Parker. Lon Cohen of the Gazette would be thrilled. Murder, high-end fraud, vintage wine, and an air of conspiracy, front-page material. But Wolfe didn't call Lon to leak, he called to provoke. We had a killer who liked neatness. Wolfe's strategy, as always, was to poke the beast until it twitched up. The next day, the story ran, second death tied to wine fraud. Wolfe had insisted the headline contain a question mark. Just enough bait to draw attention. Not enough to be liable. The article was vague, quoting an unnamed source, yours truly, and mentioning that a prominent sommelier had recently died under suspicious circumstances after raising concerns about a forged bottle. The phones started ringing by noon. 2 wine collectors, 1 attorney, and a man from the State Liquor Authority, all with questions, all with just enough nervousness in their voices to smell like pre-guilt. But it was the 4th call that really mattered. Fritz answered and brought the cordless into the office, handing it to Wolfe like a ceremonial dagger. Mr. Wolfe came. A man's voice, smooth, deliberate. My name is Victor Meriwether. I believe we need to speak. Wolfe adjusted his posture, just slightly. Why, Mr. Meriwether? Because I own the Montrose collection, the man said. And if your newspaper friend keeps printing things like that, you and I are going to have very serious problems. Wolfe smiled faintly. On the contrary, Mr. Meriwether, I believe we already do. When someone with a name like Victor Meriwether calls to threaten legal doom, you pay attention. You don't panic, but you clear your schedule. That's why, at exactly 3:15 that afternoon, I was sitting in the Fox leather lobby of Meriwether Holdings, just off Park Avenue, surrounded by brass fixtures, a suspiciously polished, ficus, and a receptionist whose cheekbones could slice fruit. "Mr. Meriwether will see you now," she said, without so much as blinking. He was in a corner office big enough to stage a Broadway play in. Tall windows, a walnut desk the size of a Buick, and most interestingly a climate-controlled wine cabinet humming softly in the corner. Victor Meriwether stood when I entered, which was polite, but his eyes didn't offer any warmth. He was trim, tanned, silver at the temples, and wore the kind of Italian suit that made you forget people still starve for a living. His handshake was firm, but not enthusiastic. "Mr. Goodwin." "I expected Mr. Wolfe. You get me," I said. "It's a package deal." He gestured to a chair and waited until I sat before resuming his own seat. No pretense of hospitality, no drinks. Just an expensive-looking man waiting for a threat to go away. "You made some heavy insinuations in the Gazette," he said. I shrugged. "We didn't name names. You used my collection as leverage. That's naming. Your name didn't come up until you volunteered it over the phone." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Let's stop dancing." Celeste Varney was mistaken. Montrose's bottle was not from my holdings, and I have no idea how a second bottle ended up at her apartment. If someone planted them, it wasn't me. I leaned forward. "Funny thing, no one said the second bottle came from your holdings, not even in the article." He froze, just for half a second. "But enough. Slip of the tongue," he said smoothly. "Or you know more than you're saying, which, I'll admit, makes this meeting a lot more fun." He narrowed his eyes. "You're poking a very expensive hornet's nest, Mr. Goodwin." "That's my job description." We stared at each other for a few quiet beats. He was used to leverage working, but I wasn't here to negotiate. I was here to watch him squirm. "Who else had access to the Montrose collection?" I asked. "No one," he said. "Not without my permission. It's secured, cataloged, and sealed. Every bottle's barcoded, insured, and tracked. And Montrose himself, he had his own private stash." Victor nodded. "He was a regular buyer, but not from me, not recently." "So where would he have gotten the Latour?" Meriwether tapped a pencil on his desk. "The sound rhythmic and irritating, no idea. But the bottle she claimed was swapped. No one's found it. You've got a dead man, a missing sommelier, and a lot of hearsay." "We've also got a cork," I said. He paused, then offered a small, theatrical smile. "If that cork leads anywhere, I'll be shocked." I stood. "I bet you will." As I turned to go, I let my eyes drift toward the wine cabinet. One of the labels caught my eye. 1953 Château Latour. "Of course, I assume that one's authentic," I said. Meriwether didn't even look. "They all are." "Glad to hear it," I said. "Might want to keep them locked up tighter. People are dying for those bottles." Back outside, I took a moment under the awning to think. Meriwether was hiding something he knew more than he was admitting, and he didn't like being shaken. But that alone didn't make him guilty. It just made him rich and defensive, which is half of Manhattan. I needed more angles. I hailed a cab and headed back uptown to La Cuvée. This time, I wasn't interested in reservations. The maitre d' tried to brush me off again, but I caught his eye and dropped Wolfe's name. That always adds 5 pounds of credibility and 3 inches of height. "I'm looking for anyone who worked the night Montrose died," I said. He sighed. "You already spoke with Miss Varney. May she rest in peace. I'm not here for gossip, just a few questions. I don't bite." He rolled his eyes, but nodded toward the back. The waiter who served Montrose was a lanky guy named Raphael, with a face that suggested he'd once modeled for cologne ads before losing a bet. He met me in the alley behind the restaurant during his cigarette break, flicking ash into a cracked flower pot. "She was right, you know," he said after I introduced myself. "About the wine. Celeste, I mean, she smelled it, said it was off. But the manager told her not to make a scene. Montrose was a VIP. Did she argue? Of course. But she was smart. Didn't push it in public. Just poured and walked away. But later she told me, said the label was to perfect, like it had been reprinted. You see the bottle? Only when I cleared the table. It was empty by then." "What did Montrose say about it?" Raphael shrugged. "He said it was fine, But the guy was weird that night. Jumpy, kept checking his phone. Barely touched his steak. He was waiting for something or someone. Anyone join him? Nope. Table. For one. But after he died, there was a mess with the security footage. Manager said the cameras in the private room glitched that night. How convenient, I muttered. Tell me about it. The whole place was tense for days. And then when Celeste didn't show up the next day, he shook his head and stubbed out the cigarette. You think she was killed? He asked quietly. I nodded. Yeah, I do. He swallowed. Then you need to talk to the wine distributor, who name's Louis Rayner, handles most of our high-end imports. He's the one who delivers the bottles. If something got swapped, he'd know. Or he should. Back at the brownstone, I relayed everything to Wolfe over beer and roasted duck. He listened with eyes half closed, his fingers laced over his stomach like a man awaiting divine revelation. So, I concluded, we've got Merriweather trying to steer the narrative. The waiter backing up Celeste's story, a mystery distributor named Louis Rayner, and camera footage that's gone poof, and a motive. Wolfe asked. Montrose was nervous. Maybe he was being blackmailed. Or maybe he knew someone was onto him. Either way, the bottle wasn't an accident. And Miss Varney, collateral. She noticed too much. Wolfe grunted. You are certain this Rayner fellow is the next step? If the bottle came through him, he either helped the swap or got played himself. Wolfe opened his eyes. Then find him. I stood, glad for the green light. And if he's dead too? Wolfe exhaled slowly. Then someone is staging a most unpleasant vintage. It was rare for Wolfe to rise from his chair before lunch. But that Friday, at 11:08, he rang for Fritz and declared he would take his midday meal in the plant room. That, for those of us fluent in Wolfine, was like hearing a volcano cough politely. Something was moving inside that brain of his. He just hadn't let the rest of us catch up. I'd spent the early morning trying to track down Louis Rayner, our elusive wine distributor. His name was etched on the delivery invoices for La Cuvée going back 6 months. But that was as far as I got before his office told me he was out of town indefinitely. Translation: someone was either paying him to be invisible or he'd gone underground voluntarily. Out of town, huh? I told Wolfe as he buttered a crumpet. At this rate, every witness with a nose and a corkscrew will be dead or missing by Sunday brunch. Wolfe didn't respond immediately. He was eyeing a cluster of Masdevallia orchids like they'd personally insulted him. You said the waiter described Montrose as jumpy. That's right. Kept checking his phone. Ate like a squirrel. And the wine, according to Miss Varney, it was too young. Her words, brash and raw. She figured it was a 95 or 96 relabeled as a 53. Wolfe frowned. Foolish. Why? Because if you're going to murder someone with a forged bottle, you don't use a 95. You use a blend, a Frankenstein, vintage, multiple grapes, synthetic aging, something designed to pass, not to taste. I blinked. You think it was made to fool someone besides her? I think, he said, chewing thoughtfully, that the wine was the message. Come again? Wolfe finally turned toward me. His eyes were sharper than I'd seen all week. A sommelier would know a Latour was fake. Most guests wouldn't. So why take the risk, unless you wanted her to notice? Unless her death wasn't an accident, or an attempt to silence her but part of the design. You think she was meant to spot the forgery? Of course. And then to die. The sequence itself creates a trail, a pattern. I folded my arms. So someone wanted the bottle to be noticed, then wanted her gone. But it had to look disconnected. Exactly. Why? To direct attention somewhere else, Wolfe said. Or to suggest a narrative. Someone is composing a crime. At that exact moment, the doorbell rang. Fritz was upstairs, so I answered. On the other side stood a woman in her early 40s, hair in a tight chignon, dressed in a navy pantsuit that screamed corporate but cultured. She looked tired, like someone had drained her from the inside out. Mr. Goodwin, she asked. That's me. She hesitated, glanced behind her, then leaned in. My name is Julia Montrose. I'm Leland's daughter. That did it. In the Wolfevers, blood ties always tighten the screw. Come in, I said, holding the door open. You're just in time for revelations. Wolfe did not stand when she entered. He never does. but he did nod respectfully, and that's as close to a curtsy as you'll get from him. She sat in the red chair, clutching her purse like it had a heartbeat. I heard about Miss Varney on the radio, she said. She served my father that night. I didn't know her well, but I remembered her face. What made you come today? Wolfe asked. I found something, she said. In his study, hidden in the drawer behind the books. She pulled out a folded envelope. I took it, opened it, and found a sheet of hotel stationery with 6 words scribbled in black ink. If I vanish. It was Victor. I looked up sharply. He wrote this. She nodded. It's his handwriting. Why hide it? I don't know. Maybe he didn't want to seem paranoid. Or maybe he didn't think anyone would believe him unless he was dead. I handed the paper to Wolfe. He read it, set it on the desk, and stared at her. Do you believe your father was murdered? Miss Montrose, she took a breath. He told me, a week before he died, that someone from his past was threatening him. Not blackmail, he was too clean for that. But something worse. He said they wanted something from him. Something he didn't have anymore. Any idea what? No, she said. But I remembered something else. Years ago when I was a teenager, my father and Victor Merriweather were inseparable. Not just business partners, close friends. Then something happened. I came downstairs one morning, and my father was burning photographs in the fireplace. Every one of them had Victor in it. And he never told you why? Wolfe asked. No, but he never spoke to him again. Wolfe steepled his fingers. Have you spoken to Mr. Merriweather since your father's death? She shook her head. I saw him at the funeral. He gave me a look that chilled me, like he'd already counted the inheritance. I raised an eyebrow. You're the sole heir, yes, but the estate's complicated. Wine assets, brokerage accounts, a villa in Tuscany. Lawyers are still sorting it. Wolfe tapped the envelope. Did you show this to the police? No, I came to you first. That earned her points. Wolfe hates the NYPD almost as much as he hates walking. You were wise to do so, he said. Now, one more question. Did your father drink frequently? Every night, she said, but always the same kind of wine. Bordeaux. He said it soothed the noise. Wolfe leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Then we have our pattern. After she left, Wolfe finally said the words I'd been waiting to hear. Mr. Goodwin, we are taking the case. I didn't grin. I merely looked satisfied. What changed? I asked. 2 things, he said. 1, the wine was the message. 2, Victor Merriweather was the intended reader. You think Victor killed Montrose to cover something up? Worse, Wolfe said. I think he killed him to say something. To who? To us. The next morning, Wolfe declared a moratorium on distractions until noon. That meant no phone calls, no orchids, and, heaven help us, no eggs. He sat in his chair like a magistrate, preparing for trial, and I brought in the notepad like a loyal bailiff. We need to assemble our dramatis personae, Wolfe said, steepling his fingers. Cast of characters? Suspects, he clarified. Or, in your vernacular, the usual band of treacherous cretins. I flipped open my notebook. You want alphabetical or by likelihood of guilt? He didn't dignify that with an answer. Let's start with Victor Merriweather, I said. Wolfe nodded. A collector, businessman, and most damningly a man who finds truth inconvenient. Motive, potential financial manipulation, revenge, or concealment of past misdeeds. He also knew Montrose personally. Something drove a wedge between them. Julia said it was sudden. Wolfe sniffed. There's no such thing as sudden in friendships among the wealthy. There's only the moment it becomes useful. Next up, Louis Rayner. I continued. Our missing wine distributor. Last seen delivering to La Cuvée. Now conveniently out of town. A coward, perhaps, Wolfe mused. Or a conspirator. Did he have access to the restaurant cellar? Definitely. He delivered directly. And from what the waiter told me, the staff trusted him like a priest. Wolfe grunted. Phooey. Trust is the refuge of the lazy. Third, the manager of La Cuvée, name's Jordan Tressel. He's the one who dismissed Celeste when she raised alarms about the wine. That makes him either a protector or a participant. Either way, he should be questioned. I jotted the name. Fourth, Julia Montrose. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. Not as a murderer, I clarified. but we should consider what she's not telling us. People rarely hand over damning notes unless they've already played every other card. She came to us with vulnerability and discretion, Wolfe said. To qualities you are pathologically unequipped to recognize. I saluted. Flattery will get you more suspects. He ignored me. Continue. Fifth, the lawyer handling Montrose's estate. Julia didn't mention a name, but I made some calls. It's a guy named Dennis Cale. Old school firm downtown. He's been Montrose's legal bulldog for 2 decades. Did he stand to benefit from Montrose's death? Indirectly, maybe. He's the executor of the estate. If someone manipulated the will or forced Montrose into certain investments before dying, Cale might have helped grease the wheels. Wolfe closed his eyes. We'll need to see that will. I already put in a call. The clerk owed me one. Wolfe opened his eyes again. Good. Now, who arranged the funeral? Julia, mostly. But Victor Merriweather was present. Wolfe made a note. If Merriweather had a role in the ceremony, he may have had access to Montrose's remains perhaps, to delay or obscure autopsy. You think someone tampered with the body after the death? I think, Wolfe said, that when money and motive are strong enough, the corpse is merely a detail. I leaned back. That's poetic, morbid, kind of charming. Wolfe looked at me flatly. I'm not trying to charm you, Mr. Goodwin, don't sell yourself short. By that afternoon, I'd lined up calls and visits with 4 out of the 5 suspects. Louis Rayner remained the invisible man. The wine distributor's office claimed he was in Spain inspecting vineyards, but no one could tell me which vineyard or what airline he flew. So I paid a visit to Jordan Trussell, the restaurant manager. Trussell looked like a man born in a vest and tie short, polished, and always ready to defend the brand. His office above the restaurant was decorated like a Fox chateau, with framed awards and a bottle of Dom Perignon mounted on a plaque like a deer head. I've told the police everything I know, he said. Miss Varney's death was a tragedy. She was a valued employee. She said you dismissed her concerns, I said. I didn't dismiss. I prioritized calm. The Montrose party was high profile, and it was a Friday night. We don't create drama in front of guests. You serve counterfeits often. His eyes sharpened. No, never. Then why wasn't that bottle flagged? It had the proper seal, paperwork, and delivery log. I'm not a sommelier, Mr. Goodwin. I trust my staff to flag problems, and when she did, I noted it. But it didn't seem critical. Even after Montrose keeled over at the table, that wasn't from the wine. He snapped. Are you a doctor? No, but then how would you know? He looked like he wanted to throw something, but nothing in his office was cheap enough to sacrifice. I'll tell you what I told the police. There were no threats, no fights, nothing unusual except his nerves. Montrose looked pale that night, distracted, but not poisoned. I stood. If you're covering for someone, now's the time. I'm not, he said. And for the record, I told Celeste to take the next day off. She never called back. You mean the day she was found dead? He flinched. Yes. I left him with a card and a look that made it clear we'd talk. Again. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened carefully while I recited every syllable. He's hiding something, I said. Either he knows who swapped the wine, or he did it himself. More likely, Wolfe said. He permitted someone else to do it. Cowards rarely act alone, and Rayner, too quiet. Wolfe muttered, if he were truly in Spain, he'd have proof of travel, a receipt, a customs log. You're sure the airline had no record? They checked all manifests, no Louis Rayner, at least not under that name. Then either he left the country under a different identity, Wolfe said, or he never left at all, which would mean he's dead, Wolfe finished, or being hidden. By who? Wolfe stared at the ceiling. That is, the only question worth answering. Current suspect list, Victor Merriweather, collector. Possible forger, had past ties to Montrose, angry, rich, and dangerous. Louis Rayner, wine distributor, vanished suddenly. If he helped forge the bottles, he's now a liability. Jordan Trussell, restaurant manager, deflected blame, possibly facilitated wine swap. Dennis Cale, estate attorney, access to Montrose's documents, potential for manipulation, unknown. Third party, the hand behind the curtain. possibly using all of the above. Wolfe stood up, and walked to the globe. He spun it once and stopped it with a finger on Spain. Find Rainer, he said. Dead or alive, you'd think. Tracking a missing wine distributor would be like chasing a grape. Through a vineyard, plenty of twists, but eventually something juicy. Instead, I got voicemail boxes, defensive assistants, and one very unhelpful hotel clerk in Madrid who swore up and down that no one named Louis Rainer had checked in under any spelling since 2004. By mid-afternoon, I was to coffees and low on leads and just cranky enough to return to an old trick, friendly bribery. Back in Manhattan, I paid a visit to a guy named Max Lurie, a customs officer stationed at JFK. He once dated a friend of a girl I almost married, and the tangled loyalty chain was just enough to earn me a peek at the recent outbound flight manifests. Max met me in a break room that smelled like burned popcorn and policy violations. "You know I'm not supposed to do this," he said, already unlocking the terminal. "And I'm not supposed to be charming," I said. "Yet here we are." He typed, squinted, and shook his head. "No one matching Louis Rainer's name or known aliases left the country in the last 10 days. No Spain, no Canada, no Bermuda. Nada." "What about private flights?" I asked. "That's trickier. You need an FAA contact for those." I left with a new problem. Rainer wasn't just missing, he was missing in a way that didn't want to be found. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was reading the Times and pretending not to wait for my return. I handed him a printout. "Louis Rainer is not in Spain. Never left the country. If his secretary thinks he did, she's lying, or being lied to." Wolfe didn't look up. So either he fled by unorthodox means, or someone else ensured his absence, like a wine collector with too much money and a bad temper. Wolfe raised a brow. "You still think Merryweather's the puppet master?" "I think he's the only one who's shown actual nerves. The rest are either hiding or covering." He tapped the paper once, then set it down. "Then let us test a theory. Call Mr. Tressel. Ask him to confirm who signed for the last 3 deliveries made by Rainer. If he gives you a name that doesn't match the signature logs, we'll know where the leak is." I picked up the phone and dialed. 10 minutes later, I was sitting with Wolfe in the office as he poured himself a rare midday beer. His eyes were closed, but his fingers were drumming a slow, measured beat on the armrest. "So," I said, "Tressel says that Louis Rainer personally delivered the last shipment, including the Latour, and the signature on the receipt says otherwise. It's not Rainer's writing." Wolfe smiled faintly. "Then the bottle was swapped before it reached La Cuvée. That narrows it. Indeed, it also proves that Mr. Tressel is lying." I sat up straighter. "About the delivery, about having seen Rainer. Either he forged the signature himself, or he allowed someone else to deliver the wine in Rainer's name." I thought it over. "So why lie?" "Because he's either complicit or being threatened." "Find out which." I paid a second visit to La Cuvée that evening, just in time for the lull between dinner prep and doors open. Tressel wasn't happy to see me. "You again," he said, hands on hips. "If you keep dropping in like this, I'll start charging you corkage." I closed the door behind me. "You said Rainer delivered the last shipment." "He did," Tressel said quickly. "Wrong. The signature doesn't match. Customs says he never left the country. So either you forged the slip, or you let someone else deliver under his name." His face drained color like a tub with the plug pulled. "I didn't forge it," he said, after a beat too long. "So someone else did." He paced behind his desk, arms crossed tight across his chest. I look. Rainer was supposed to deliver it himself, but he called, said he had car trouble, sent his assistant instead. Some kid I didn't recognize, and you didn't verify that. "It was a busy day," he said. "Montrose was coming in. We had back-to-back reservations, and the kid had Rainer's delivery tag." "So you signed?" "No. One of the kitchen staff did. A porter. I didn't see the label until Celeste flagged it, and then you told her to let it slide." He looked at me, face tense. "Because I was already into deep, and because I was scared. The kid didn't come back. Rainer went dark, and then Montrose dropped dead." "Why didn't you tell the cops?" He sat down hard. "Because I'm not stupid. If this is what it looks like someone swapped that bottle on purpose, then I helped. Accidentally or not, I helped, you think. The DA's going to listen to nuance. I narrowed my eyes. You still have the rest of that shipment. He shook his head. The other bottles are gone. To got used that weekend. The rest were picked up. By who? I don't know. A man in a black car. I assumed it was another of Rayner's people. License plate. Didn't check. Of course not. Back at the brownstone, I relayed the confession. Wolfe nodded once. Then Tressel's alibi collapses. He saw a delivery. Yes, but not from the source he claimed. That makes him either an idiot or a stooge. I'm voting both. He's not the killer, Wolfe said. But he enabled one. I sat. So where does that leave us? Wolfe lifted the cork Celeste had left still preserved in a velvet pouch and turned it slowly. Between his fingers, we have a forged vintage, a vanishing distributor, a frightened restaurant manager, and a dead sommelier who noticed too much, and a collector with motive and money, and ego, Wolfe added. Don't forget that. So what next? Wolfe leaned back. We bait the ego. I blinked. With what? He smiled. With the one thing men like Victor Merriweather can't resist: proof that they've been fooled. Wolfe's plan, as usual, relied less on firepower and more on psychological demolition. He didn't want to storm Victor Merriweather's fortress. He wanted to make Merriweather invite us in. Convince he was the smartest man in the room. All I had to do was show up, play dumb, and let the hook set. Dress well, Wolfe said, without looking up from his chair. Men like Merriweather are allergic to cheap shoes. I wore my gray suit, the one Wolfe says makes me look like I might know a poem or two, and carried with me a little velvet pouch containing the cork. It wasn't just evidence, it was bait. My excuse? I told Merriweather I'd found another bottle that might be from the same batch, the same fake vintage. I suggested we meet discreetly to discuss it. I didn't mention Wolfe, and I didn't mention Celeste. Just enough mystery to make him curious. Just enough suggestion to make him anxious. To my surprise, he agreed. We met at the King George Club, one of those midtown sanctuaries where leather armchairs outnumber working people, and where everything smells faintly of cologne and condescension. Merriweather was already seated in a corner booth, swirling a glass of something red and ruinously expensive. Mr. Goodwin, he said, without standing, you've got a talent for reappearing, and you've got a talent for not answering questions, I said, sliding into the booth. Shall we trade? His smile didn't move. You said you found something? I pulled out the pouch and dropped it gently on the white tablecloth. This cork came from a bottle labeled Château Latour 1953. The woman who noticed the forgery is dead. The man who drank it is dead. And the distributor who handled it has vanished. He reached for the pouch, but I closed it first. I'd prefer if you didn't touch it. Wolfe's having it analyzed for glue composition and needle markings. That, finally, cracked the fouet. His fingers twitched slightly, then retracted like a retractable knife. I assume you're implying that I had something to do with this. I'm implying that someone did, and your name keeps coming up like a bad penny. He sipped his wine calmly. I'm being framed. By who? If I knew that, I'd have dealt with it. You expect me to believe that someone forged a label, poisoned a sommelier, and framed you all without leaving a trace? Not a trace, he said. Just enough of a trail to make me look like I'm hiding something. I leaned back. So what are you hiding? I've already told you. No, I interrupted. You've told me what didn't happen. What you don't know, that's not the same as telling me the truth. He drained his glass and waved a waiter over for another. I've been in this business a long time. Goodwin. I've seen collectors fake marriages to inherit a single vintage. I've seen men poison themselves rather than admit they bought a bad Burgundy. But this is personal. This is a performance. I waited. He didn't elaborate. Let me ask you this, I said. Who else besides you and Montrose had access to your private reserves? He shook his head. No one. Not a sommelier, not Rayner. He hesitated. Bingo. Double quotes. Rayner handled a few private transfers. He admitted, but only under supervision, which, you're sure he followed? He didn't answer. That silence told me more than any confession. Here's the thing, I said. I think Rayner was paid to swap out a bottle. I think he didn't know what he was getting into. And I think whoever made the switch needed Celeste Varney dead before she could testify to it. Merriweather's eyes hardened. And you think, that's me. I think it's someone with your resources and your grudge. He stood abruptly. This conversation is over. As I stood, I made the mistake of touching the tablecloth to retrieve my napkin, and that's when I noticed it. A small slip of paper tucked under the sugar bowl. Someone had slid it there while we talked. I pulled it out. For words, written in smudged pencil. You're being followed. Careful. I looked up fast. Merriweather was already gone. A moment later, I saw a shadow shift near the Bartol guy, blue coat, staring into a whiskey glass like it owed him money. So I left. Through the kitchen. I took the long route back to the brownstone to Subway's. 3 wrong turns and a jog through Central Park. I didn't stop until I was inside, door locked. Coat off, lungs burning. Wolfe was in the dining room, halfway through a plate of roast pigeon. You were followed, he said without looking up. I figured that out. I wheezed. Someone slipped me a note. Describe him. Didn't see who wrote it. But there was a guy by the bar. Blue coat, whiskey face. Could have been him. Fritz brought me water, and Wolfe waited until I'd caught my breath before speaking. Again, then we have confirmation. Of what? That Merriweather's not the killer. I blinked. Come again. He's too frightened, Wolfe said. Too reactive. If he were the murderer, he'd have had you silenced at the club or manipulated you more subtly. Instead, he fled. Then who left the note? Someone with a conscience, Wolfe said. Or a need. I dropped into my chair. So I'm officially a target now. You've always been a target, Wolfe said dryly. Now it's just more obvious. Great. He reached for a second helping. I'd suggest you carry a revolver. I'd suggest you carry one, I muttered. I'm the one getting tailed while you eat squaw in your slippers. He gave me a rare glance of sympathy. Tomorrow, we invite our guests, all of them, one by one. The suspects, no, he said. The actors, and we give them a stage. The next day was a Saturday, and Wolfe declared it a suitable day for confrontation. That meant he would spend it doing what he loved most, sitting still while other people squirmed. He had me draft a series of polite but commanding invitations. No please, no kindly, just Wolfe's name, the word urgent, and the implication that saying no would be more dangerous than showing up. It worked. By noon, the brownstone's front door had become a revolving portal of guilt and dry clean tension. We arranged them one at a time. Wolfe hates overlapping interrogations. It disrupts the mental catalog he keeps like a librarian. Who bites? First to arrive was Jordan Trussell, the restaurant manager. He came in looking like he'd spent the night inside a dryer, shirt wrinkled, tie askew, the bags under his eyes packed and ready for a long trip. I led him to the office and took my usual spot in the red chair, notepad in hand. Wolfe didn't rise. Mr. Trussell, he said, let us speak frankly. If you lie, you will be caught. If you dissemble, I will grow irritated. Neither is pleasant. Understood? Trussell nodded. Yes, sir. You stated previously that Louis Rayner made the last wine delivery to La Cuvée. Trussell swallowed. Yes, I know that was wrong. Not wrong, Wolfe corrected. False, deliberately so. Now, did you recognize the man who delivered the crate? No, just that he claimed to work for Rayner. Had paperwork and everything. Describe him. Tall, late 30s, maybe. Pale, kind of jittery. Wore gloves. Gloves, Wolfe repeated. In July. Yes, Wolfe glanced at me. I scribbled the note. Did he say anything unusual? He told the kitchen staff not to open the crate until service began. Said it was temperature sensitive, and you obeyed. Trussell looked ashamed. Yes, do you know understand, Wolfe said coolly, that you were not merely negligent, you were an accessory to a murder? You again, he said, hands on hips. If you keep dropping in like this, I'll start charging you corkage. I closed the door behind me. You said Rayner delivered the last shipment. He did, Trussell said quickly. Wrong. The signature doesn't match. Customs says he never left the country. So either you forged the slip, or you let someone else deliver under his name. His face drained color like a tub with the plug pulled. I didn't forge it, he said. After a beat too long. So someone else did. He paced behind his desk. arms crossed tight across his chest. I look. Rayner was supposed to deliver it himself, but he called, said he had car trouble, sent his assistant instead. Some kid I didn't recognize, and you didn't verify that. It was a busy day, he said. Montrose was coming in. We had back-to-back reservations, and the kid had Rayner's delivery tag. So you signed? No. One of the kitchen staff did. A porter. I didn't see the label until Celeste flagged it, and then you told her to let it slide. He looked at me, face tense, because I was already into deep, and because I was scared. The kid didn't come back. Rayner went dark, and then Montrose dropped dead. Why didn't you tell the cops? He sat down hard. Because I'm not stupid. If this is what it looks like, someone swapped that bottle on purpose, then I helped. Accidentally or not, I helped, you think. The DA's going to listen to nuance. I narrowed my eyes. You still have the rest of that shipment. He shook his head. The other bottles are gone. To got used that weekend. The rest were picked up. By who? I don't know. A man in a black car. I assumed it was another of Rayner's people. License plate. Didn't check. Of course not. Back at the brownstone, I relayed the confession. Wolfe nodded once, then Tressel's alibi collapses. He saw a delivery. Yes, but not from the source he claimed. That makes him either an idiot or a stooge. I'm voting both. He's not the killer, Wolfe said. But he enabled one. I sat. So where does that leave us? Wolfe lifted the cork Celeste had left still preserved in a velvet pouch and turned it slowly. Between his fingers, we have a forged vintage, a vanishing distributor, a frightened restaurant manager, and a dead sommelier who noticed too much, and a collector with motive and money, and ego, Wolfe added. Don't forget that. So what next? Wolfe leaned back. We bait the ego. I blinked. With what? He smiled. With the one thing men like Victor Meriwether can't resist: proof that they've been fooled. Wolfe's plan, as usual, relied less on firepower and more on psychological demolition. He didn't want to storm Victor Meriwether's fortress. He wanted to make Meriwether invite us in, convince he was the smartest man in the room. All I had to do was show up, play dumb, and let the hook set. Dress well, Wolfe said, without looking up from his chair. Men like Meriwether are allergic to cheap shoes. I wore my gray suit, the one Wolfe says makes me look like I might know a poem or two, and carried with me a little velvet pouch containing the cork. It wasn't just evidence, it was bait. My excuse? I told Meriwether I'd found another bottle that might be from the same batch, the same fake vintage. I suggested we meet discreetly to discuss it. I didn't mention Wolfe, and I didn't mention Celeste. Just enough mystery to make him curious, just enough suggestion to make him anxious. To my surprise, he agreed. We met at the King George Club, one of those midtown sanctuaries where leather armchairs outnumber working people, and where everything smells faintly of cologne and condescension. Meriwether was already seated in a corner booth, swirling a glass of something red and ruinously expensive. Mr. Goodwin, he said, without standing, you've got a talent for reappearing, and you've got a talent for not answering questions, I said, sliding into the booth. Shall we trade? His smile didn't move. You said you found something? I pulled out the pouch and dropped it gently on the white tablecloth. This cork came from a bottle labeled Château Latour 1953. The woman who noticed the forgery is dead. The man who drank it is dead. And the distributor who handled it has vanished. He reached for the pouch, but I closed it first. I'd prefer if you didn't touch it. Wolfe's having it analyzed for glue composition and needle markings. That, finally, cracked the fouet. His fingers twitched slightly, then retracted like a retractable knife. I assume you're implying that I had something to do with this. I'm implying that someone did, and your name keeps coming up like a bad penny. He sipped his wine calmly. I'm being framed. By who? If I knew that, I'd have dealt with it. You expect me to believe that someone forged a label, poisoned a sommelier, and framed you all without leaving a trace? Not a trace, he said. Just enough of a trail to make me look like I'm hiding something. I leaned back. So what are you hiding? I've already told you no, I interrupted. You've told me what didn't happen. What you don't know, that's not the same as telling me the truth. He drained his glass and waved a waiter over for another. I've been in this business a long time. Goodwin. I've seen collectors fake marriages to inherit a single vintage. I've seen men poison themselves rather than admit they bought a bad Burgundy. But this is personal. This is a performance. I waited. He didn't elaborate. Let me ask you this, I said. Who else besides you and Montrose had access to your private reserves? He shook his head. No one. Not a sommelier, not Rayner. He hesitated. Bingo. Double quotes. Rayner handled a few private transfers. He admitted, but only under supervision. Which? You're sure he followed? He didn't answer. That silence told me more than any confession. Here's the thing, I said. I think Rayner was paid to swap out a bottle. I think he didn't know what he was getting into. And I think whoever made the switch needed Celeste Varney dead before she could testify to it. Merriweather's eyes hardened. And you think? That's me. I think it's someone with your resources and your grudge. He stood abruptly. This conversation is over. As I stood, I made the mistake of touching the tablecloth to retrieve my napkin, and that's when I noticed it. A small slip of paper tucked under the sugar bowl. Someone had slid it there while we talked. I pulled it out. For words, written in smudged pencil. You're being followed. Careful. I looked up fast. Merriweather was already gone. A moment later, I saw a shadow shift near the Bardall guy, blue coat, staring into a whiskey glass like it owed him money. So I left. Through the kitchen. I took the long route back to the brownstone to Subway's. 3 wrong turns, and a jog through Central Park. I didn't stop until I was inside, door locked, coat off, lungs burning. Wolfe was in the dining room, halfway through a plate of roast pigeon. You were followed, he said without looking up. I figured that out, I wheezed. Someone slipped me a note. Describe him, didn't see who wrote it. But there was a guy by the bar. Blue coat, whiskey face. Could have been him. Fritz brought me water, and Wolfe waited until I'd caught my breath before speaking. Again, then we have confirmation. Of what? That Merriweather's not the killer. I blinked. Come again. He's too frightened, Wolfe said. Too reactive. If he were the murderer, he'd have had you silenced at the club or manipulated you more subtly. Instead, he fled. Then who left the note? Someone with a conscience, Wolfe said. Or a need. I dropped into my chair. So I'm officially a target now. You've always been a target, Wolfe said dryly. Now it's just more obvious. Great. He reached for a second helping. I'd suggest you carry a revolver. I'd suggest you carry one, I muttered. I'm the one getting tailed while you eat squaw in your slippers. He gave me a rare glance of sympathy. Tomorrow, we invite our guests, all of them, one by one. The suspects, no, he said. The actors, and we give them a stage. The next day was a Saturday, and Wolfe declared it a suitable day for confrontation. That meant he would spend it doing what he loved most, sitting still while other people squirmed. He had me draft a series of polite but commanding invitations. No please, no kindly, just Wolfe's name, the word urgent, and the implication that saying no would be more dangerous than showing up. It worked. By noon, the brownstone's front door had become a revolving portal of guilt and dry clean tension. We arranged them one at a time. Wolfe hates overlapping interrogations. It disrupts the mental catalog he keeps like a librarian. Who bites? First to arrive was Jordan Trussell, the restaurant manager. He came in looking like he'd spent the night inside a dryer, shirt wrinkled, tie askew, the bags under his eyes packed and ready for a long trip. I led him to the office and took my usual spot in the red chair, notepad in hand. Wolfe didn't rise. Mr. Trussell, he said, let us speak frankly. If you lie, you will be caught. If you dissemble, I will grow irritated. Neither is pleasant. Understood? Trussell nodded. Yes, sir. You stated previously that Louis Rayner made the last wine delivery to La Cuvée. Trussell swallowed. Yes, I know that was wrong. Not wrong, Wolfe corrected. False, deliberately so. Now, did you recognize the man who delivered the crate? No, just that he claimed to work for Rayner. Had paperwork and everything. Describe him. Tall, late 30s, maybe, pale, kind of jittery. Wore gloves, Wolfe repeated, in July. Yes, Wolfe glanced at me. I scribbled the note. Did he say anything unusual? He told the kitchen staff not to open the crate until service began. Said it was temperature sensitive. and you obeyed. Trussell looked ashamed. Yes, do you now understand, Wolfe said coolly, that you were not merely negligent, you were an accessory to a murder? You think he was silenced? I think, Wolfe said, we're dealing with a director, not just a killer, a choreographer of guilt. He hung up. Then he turned to me. Tomorrow, the office. We assemble them all. Everyone. He stood. His face was grim. The show begins. The morning after Merryweather's so-called suicide. The brownstone was quieter than usual. Not solemn. Wolfe doesn't do solemn, but heavy. Like the silence had picked up a few pounds. Overnight, Wolfe didn't emerge for breakfast. That alone told me he was brewing something potent. I'd seen him skip meals only 3 times. Once when Theodore threatened to quit. Once during the Banshee Street poisoning fiasco. And once when I accidentally spilled clam juice on an orchid ledger. By 10:30, I found him in the plant room. He was in his usual position, sunk into the canvas-backed stool, tweezers in hand, examining a Paphiopedilum hybrid as if it might whisper the answer to everything. Theodore Horstman stood off to the side, silent, arms folded, watching his boss with the protective focus of a nurse and the patience of a nun. I cleared my throat. Wolfe didn't look up. Mr. Goodwin, has the world ended? Not yet. But the plot has thickened to gravy. He adjusted the orchid's support wire by a millimeter. Merryweather was not a murderer, but he was guilty. Of what? Greed, arrogance, and underestimating people. I stepped inside the warm, humid chamber of floral meditation and lowered my voice. So if he didn't kill Montrose, he facilitated it, Wolfe said. He hired Rayner. He planned to humiliate his former friend. But someone else took that humiliation and turned it lethal. Someone who was watching both of them. Exactly. Theodore finally spoke. Mr. Wolfe, I must remind you this humidity is for the phalaenopsis, not for you. You've been in here over an hour. Wolfe waved a dismissive hand. The orchids are indifferent to my presence, as long as I do not offend them. Theodore sighed, but didn't push. That was love. In orchid language, I pulled up a stool of my own. So what's the play? Wolfe finally turned toward me, his eyes sharper than I'd seen all week. We have the murderer. We lack only the confession. I blinked. You're sure? I was sure the moment Rayner opened that door. But Merryweather's death confirms it. Then why not call Kramer now? Because the murderer must confess. Publicly, in my office. Or else the truth will dissolve into speculation. And justice will be lost in ambiguity. He turned back. To the orchids, this case has already taken 3 lives. We will not let it take the truth. Later that afternoon, I found Fritz in the kitchen chopping parsley with the solemnity of a priest preparing incense. He didn't look up when I came in. You heard? I asked. I did. He said. About Merryweather? Yes. About Mr. Rayner as well. I made him toast this morning. He was trembling. Yeah, I said. He's lucky to be alive. Fritz paused his knife. Do you think the killer will come here? If Wolfe gets his way, I said, they'll walk in through the front door. He nodded, slowly. I will make chocolate souffle. Danger makes you bake. It calms the nerves. I smiled. That's oddly poetic. He went back to chopping. If you are going to face death, Mr. Goodwin, you might as well do it after dessert. At 4:15, Wolfe called a final meeting in the office. Present: myself, looking dapper despite the shadows under my eyes. Wolfe, back in the yellow shirt and brown vest combo. He reserves for showdowns. Fritz, in and out with trays. Louis Rayner, still pale, but clean-shaven and nervously sipping tea. Julia Montrose, dressed in black, seated near the bookshelves, silent. And a final, unexpected rival, Dennis Cale, the lawyer. Wolfe invited him personally that morning. I hear Victor's death was suicide, Cale said as he entered. Wolfe didn't rise. You heard wrong. Cale paused. You're saying someone murdered him? I'm saying someone made it look like suicide, and did so very carefully. Who you? Wolfe said. There was no gasp, no crash of teacups, just a moment of perfect stillness. Cale's face didn't change, not right away. Then, the corners of his mouth twitched just once and fell again. That's absurd, is it? Wolfe leaned forward. You had access to Montrose's financials. You knew about the cellar. You were executor of the estate. You could stall probate, erase traces, and you had motive. What motive? Wolfe lifted a folder from his desk and opened it. 3 years ago, you lost a malpractice suit. Quietly settled, the payout nearly bankrupted your firm. But 6 months later, you came into large funds. A quiet partner bought into the practice. Cale's jaw tightened. You're reaching. I never reach, Wolfe said. Montrose found out. That's why he rewrote the will. He cut you out. And he told Meriwether, you were about to lose everything. You have no proof. I have Rayner. Wolfe said, who confirms? The delivery. I have Trestle, who confirms a stranger carried that wine. And I have motive. Cale turned to Julia. Are you seriously buying this? But Julia didn't speak. Her eyes were fixed on Wolfe. You used Meriwether, Wolfe said. He paid for the swap, but you made it fatal. Then you killed Celeste before she could talk. And finally, you killed Meriwether, your only loose end. Cale laughed once. Do you have any idea how insane this sounds? Wolfe stood. I have no need for sanity, he said. Only facts. You entered Montrose's study the night he died. You took the note he wrote about Victor. But Julia found a carbon copy in the desk's hidden drawer. Cale's face cracked. Not admissible, he said, voice rising. Not in court, Wolfe said. But this isn't court. Cale turned toward the door. Don't, I said. He froze. The room held its breath. Then Cale exhaled slow, resigned. I didn't mean to kill Montrose, he said. It was supposed to scare him. I thought he'd taste the wine, realize. He'd been played, and panic. Maybe a heart attack. But he drank the whole thing, and died. He turned toward Julia. I'm sorry. She didn't respond. Rayner stood up, slowly, trembling. You killed Celeste. She wouldn't shut up. Cale said. She called me, said she was going to the police. I didn't have a choice. You had a choice, Wolfe said. You just wanted to control the story. Kramer arrived 10 minutes later. We handed Cale over like a wrapped gift. And for once, Wolfe didn't grumble about the intrusion. The next morning brought a cold snap and an even colder surprise. I was in the kitchen with Fritz, finishing my 3rd cup of coffee and half a marmalade. Scone when the front door rang. Not buzzed. Rang. Old-fashioned bell. No warning. I checked my watch. 8:02 a.m. Wolfe's eyebrows would be doing calisthenics when I opened the door. I found a man in a slate gray coat, wearing sunglasses and a scarf even though the sky was clear. He looked tired, but his posture was too proud to admit it. In his gloved hand, he held an envelope. Are you Mr. Goodwin? I'm the one with the door privileges, I said. And you are. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed me the envelope. It's for Mr. Wolfe. He said, you should read it first. He turned and walked off before I could offer my usual charm or sarcasm. Disappeared down the steps like a ghost. I closed the door, cracked the envelope, and read the contents. It was a confession from Victor Meriwether. I took it straight to the office. Wolfe was already seated, surrounded by the comforting clutter of books, blotter, and a blue vase full of irises Fritz had arranged with military precision. I dropped the envelope on the desk like a smoking gun. You might want to read that before breakfast. He opened it, eyes scanning quickly, his lips pressed together in something close to disgust. The confession read, to whomever it may concern, I take full responsibility for the death of Leland Montrose. I orchestrated the switch. I wanted him humiliated. I wanted him to know that I hadn't forgotten what he did. Celeste Varney was collateral and fortunate, but necessary. Louis Rayner was manipulated, not guilty. I used him, and when I saw the walls closing in, I did what I had to do. Don't bother with the trial. I've taken the only sentence that fits. Victor. Meriwether will set the paper down and exhaled slowly. Imitation, he said. I frowned. What? It's not his handwriting, and even if it were, it's theatrically hollow. You think someone forged a suicide note after the suicide? I think someone forged a confession after a murder, Wolfe said. To tidy up the mess. Cale, no, Wolfe said, standing. He wouldn't give Meriwether credit. Whoever wrote this wanted Meriwether remembered as guilty, as monstrous, even worse than the truth. I read the note again. The language was often moralizing, too polished. Meriwether had been arrogant. Yes, but not this dramatic. So someone's framing a corpse. Exactly. The doorbell rang again. This time, it was Julia Montrose. She looked better, calmer. Like the tension in her shoulders had finally stopped whispering threats. She carried a large manila folder and an uncertain smile. "I found this in my father's cellar," she said, handing it to me. Behind the wine racks. It was sealed in plastic, labeled for Julia, if anything happens. I was too afraid to open it yesterday. Inside the folder were copies of 2 wire transfers to Dennis Cale's firm from an anonymous shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. A memo written by Montrose detailing his suspicion that Cale was using his name to launder money through fake wine acquisitions, and a list of names collectors, brokers, and one restaurateur implicated in what Montrose called a high-level wine laundering scheme. Wolfe whistled under his breath, a rare sound. "This," he said, "would have ruined Cale completely." I nodded. "And anyone he pulled into it." Julia took a seat. "I thought it might help close the loop." "It does," Wolfe said. "More than you know." I handed her the forged confession. She read it twice, then looked up. "Victor didn't write this." "I agree." Then who? Wolfe interrupted. "Someone who needed a final act. Someone who understood how narrative overrides evidence. But it's an afterthought. A footnote." "So it's over?" she asked. "Yes," Wolfe said. Though justice is never tidy. Later that afternoon, just when we'd started convincing ourselves the curtain had dropped, a call came from Lon Cohen at the Gazette. "You're going to want to see this," he said. We met at the Gazette offices, me, Wolfe, and a steaming air of irritation that Wolfe carried with him like an accessory. Lon handed us a printed email. It was a leak from someone anonymous, sent to the newsroom. It included the forged Merriweather confession and photos of Cale's arrest, Rayner in hiding, and Julia entering our brownstone. All time-stamped, all damning. "They're trying to paint the whole thing as a conspiracy," Lon said. "Blogs are already running. Headlines: Montrose murder was cover-up for estate fraud. Rogue detective duo manipulate truth." You name it. Wolfe read the message twice, then handed it back. "Find the IP address," he said. "We're working on it," Lon said. "But it's coming from a VPN in Prague." I glanced at Wolfe, a final misdirection. "No," he said, grim. "A red herring. Then what do we do?" Wolfe sighed. "We ignore it. Truth has already been handed over. Let the story slither where it pleases. We've done our part." Lon frowned. "You're not going to respond?" Wolfe shook his head. "Why would I? I don't argue with the tide. I wait for it to recede and collect what's left behind." Back at the brownstone, Fritz served ducky Larange and baked apples. Rayner had gone home under quiet protection. Julia had left with the folder to deliver it to Kramer personally. And Wolfe was quiet. That meant he was satisfied. Which, in his world, is as loud as triumph gets. Wolfe never springs a trap without first fluffing the cushions. It was Sunday evening, and the brownstone had taken on the air of a theater, waiting for its curtain call. The chairs were dusted, the lighting adjusted. Fritz even arranged the tulips in the entryway vase to point slightly east, as if to whisper, "You are being watched." Wolfe had summoned everyone. Again. Julia Montrose, Louis Rayner, Jordan Trussell, Inspector Kramer, even Theodore was invited, though Wolfe didn't say why. And me, I was playing host, narrator, and backup in case things got too interesting. "This is unnecessary," Kramer muttered as he arrived, tugging off his overcoat like it owed him money. "Cale's in custody. His prints are on the fake label. We've got wire transfers and motive. You've got your neat little bow." Wolfe, seated as always in his throne behind the desk, looked up with the weariness of a man forced to explain oxygen. "You mistake closure for clarity," he said. "Cale executed the crimes, yes, but he was no mastermind." Kramer scoffed. "So who is that?" Wolfe said. "Is why we've convened." At exactly 7 p.m., the last guest arrived, Julia. She wore navy this time, a change from her earlier morning black, but her eyes were sharper, resigned, but focused. She took her seat near the window and crossed her legs like she was bracing for impact. Fritz poured coffee. Kramer grumbled into his mustache. Trussell fidgeted with a cufflink. And Rayner, still ghost pale, stared at the floor. Wolfe began. "We have reached the final act," he said. "And as in all good performances, the ending must be earned." He turned toward Julia. "Miss Montrose, what do you believe your father was protecting?" She blinked. "His collection, his reputation, his legacy." Wolfe shook his head. "No, he was protecting you." There was a silence so complete you could hear Tressel's cufflink click. "What?" Julia asked softly. Wolfe nodded toward me. I opened the folder he'd handed me earlier and placed it in front of her. Inside was a notarized document dated 6 months prior, a quiet legal maneuver transferring power of attorney from Leland Montrose to Julia. "But," she whispered, "he never told me no," Wolfe said. "Because you would have objected. You would have fought him. But he knew what Cale was doing, knew he was funneling illicit funds through the estate, and that once Leland was out of the way, you would become the final link." Rayner spoke up for the first time. "He said someone was coming after her. That's why he made me hide. In case it happened." Julia looked stunned. "You think Cale was going to kill me too?" "No," Wolfe said. "He was going to discredit you, frame you for financial mismanagement. You'd be exiled from your own family name. But someone else had a different idea." Kramer leaned forward. "Meaning what?" Wolfe stood. "This always means we're closing in." He turned to the room like a conductor at his final crescendo. "I propose this. Dennis Cale was manipulated, blackmailed, in fact, by someone with both access and understanding of the Montrose estate, someone who knew the cellar's secrets, someone who planted the idea of humiliating Montrose through the wine. But when Montrose died unexpectedly, that person panicked. They killed Celeste to keep her quiet. Then they killed Cale's credibility by feeding him the forged Merriweather confession. And when that didn't suffice, they murdered Merriweather himself." Kramer barked. "Who?" Wolfe looked directly at Jordan Tressel. "You." The restaurant manager went stiff as a bottleneck. That's insane." "No," Wolfe said. "It's logical. You had access. You forged the delivery log. You let in the man with the fake crate because you sent him. Rayner wasn't supposed to be seen again. But Montrose died too soon. And then Celeste noticed. And that ruined everything. I was just doing my job." Tressel snapped. "Exactly," Wolfe said. "Your job was to help launder fake vintages for a price. And when the cork came loose, you tried to shove it back in." Rayner spoke up. "The man who took the crate from me, he called someone after the switch. He said the manager's in." Wolfe turned to Kramer. "Search his accounts. You'll find quiet deposits from the same shell company Cale used." Tressel shot up. "You can't prove anything." Kramer stood to. "We don't have to. Not anymore." But Wolfe wasn't finished. "You also forged the suicide note." Tressel blinked. Wolfe pointed at Julia. "Your father's carbon paper didn't match the suicide note's ink density. Different stroke pressure, different rhythm. You copied Merriweather's signature, but you couldn't replicate his loathing." Tressel took a step back. Rayner flinched. Then Julia stood. "You killed them," she said, voice shaking. "All of them. I didn't mean for it to happen like this," Tressel stammered. "Montrose was supposed to choke a little, get embarrassed. Cale wanted him out of the way, but it wasn't supposed to kill him. You murdered a woman," I said, standing, "and framed a dead man. You forged papers, manipulated Rayner, and sold wine soaked in blood." Kramer stepped in and pulled out the cuffs. "Jordan Tressel, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, fraud, and accessory to homicide." Tressel didn't resist. He just sagged, like something had been holding him upright, and it had finally let go. After the door closed behind the cops, Wolfe sat down hard. He didn't speak. None of us did. Even Fritz stayed quiet, as if to honor the stillness Wolfe demanded when everything was finally in place. I walked over to the window and looked out. The street was dark, quiet, and calm. We had our killer, and, for once, it actually felt like justice might stick. Wolfe never repeats himself. He believes that once an idea has reached its apex, revisiting it is a kind of intellectual necrophilia. But there is one exception to that rule: the final explanation, the ritual, the office lineup, the great reveal. This is the temple of Wolfe's deductive religion. And on that rainy Monday evening, the pews were full. In attendance, Julia Montrose, seated stiffly in the red chair, Louis Rayner, calmer now but visibly hollowed by what he'd endured. Inspector Kramer, planted with arms crossed and suspicion steaming out of every pore. Theodore Horseman, observing quietly from the threshold. Fritz, discreet behind the office door, eavesdropping under the noble banner of hospitality. And, of course, Wolfe Center. Stage, hands folded over his stomach, surrounded by books, logic, and righteous disdain. I sat in my usual chair, notepad open, pen ready. Though at this point, I could have written the closing speech from memory. Wolfe began, as always, with a breath. Ladies and gentlemen, this will not take long. Kramer grunted. It never does. And yet somehow it always does. Wolfe ignored him. 6 days ago, Leland Montrose died in a restaurant. The cause was listed as cardiac arrest. That was a mistake. He died because a man named Jordan Trestle allowed poison into his wine glass. Julia shifted in her seat. The wine, Wolfe continued, was never intended to kill. It was meant to humiliate. A counterfeit bottle, swapped in with precision, using a forged label and a willing though ignorant deliveryman. That man was Louis Rayner. Rayner's mouth tightened, but he didn't speak. He believed he was participating in a prank, perhaps cruel, but harmless. The mastermind, as far as Rayner knew, was Victor Merriweather, and for a time, that was true. Merriweather wanted to embarrass Montrose' revenge for an old betrayal. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, but then something changed. The forgery became fatal. Montrose drank the wine, and minutes later, he was dead. Kramer interrupted. We've got toxicology now. Minute traces of oleandrin in the wine residue. Wolfe nodded. A deadly cardiac glycoside. Untraceable. In low doses unless one is looking for it. Whoever added it knew their botany. He turned his gaze to Julia. After Montrose's death, the trap began to tighten. Celeste. Varney noticed the counterfeit. She voiced her suspicion, and for that, she was killed. Julia looked down. Louis Rayner, realizing the game was far darker than he'd been told, fled. Montrose hid him in the cellar, where he remained until Miss Montrose discovered him by accident. That discovery triggered the final act. He lifted the forged suicide note from his desk. This was left on our doorstep, purporting to be Merriweather's confession. It was not. It was designed to shift blame, to close the case neatly, to let the real killer walk away. Wolfe turned to Kramer. You believed it for a time. So did we. But the language was too polished, the syntax too tidy. Merriweather was arrogant, not theatrical. He wouldn't have written this. Kramer grunted again. So you're saying Merriweather didn't kill anyone, Poe? He's guilty, Wolfe said. He engineered the bottle swap. He manipulated Rayner. But he didn't kill Montrose. And he certainly didn't kill Celeste. So who did? Wolfe let the silence stretch like a rubber band about to snap. Jordan Trestle. The name dropped like a hammer. Restaurant manager, quiet, efficient, overlooked, and deeply involved. He forged the delivery receipt. He orchestrated the delivery. Boy, and when Montrose died prematurely, he panicked. He silenced Celeste. He forged the suicide note. And he killed Merriweather to protect himself. Kramer looked skeptical. And motive? Money, Wolfe said. Trestle was receiving side payments through a shell corporation, one also linked to Dennis Cale. When Cale started laundering money through fake wine deals, Trestle became the facilitator. He used La Cuvie's cellar as a staging ground. Montrose found out, so he had to die. Julia raised her hand quietly, like a child in church. But how do we know Trestle killed my father? What if Cale added the poison himself? Wolfe nodded to me. I stood, opened the folder, and pulled out the lab report. Fingerprints on the inner cork of the wine bottle came back yesterday, I said. 2 sets, one belonging to Rayner, the other to Trestle. Kramer blinked. You got that? I grinned. I know people. And Trestle's prints were on the poison packet found in Cale's apartment. Wolfe added, he'd tried to frame his partner. Kramer muttered something creative under his breath. Wolfe sat back. It was never about wine, he said. It was about control. Montrose controlled the legacy. Cale controlled the money. Merriweather wanted revenge. Trestle, he wanted to be the man behind the curtain. And when the curtain slipped, he tried to erase the stage. I looked at Julia. Her eyes were red, but dry. "You were never the target," Wolfe said. "You were the cleanup crew, the final obstacle." "And now?" she asked. "Now," Kramer said, standing, "Trestle goes to trial. Cale rots in custody. And we all get a headache trying to explain this to the press." Wolfe smiled faintly. "I recommend they start with the wine." After everyone left, Wolfe returned to the plant room. He sat among his orchids like a general counting the dead. I brought him a beer. "As tradition demands, think she'll be okay?" I asked. "Julia Montrose," he said. "She'll recover. She has strength, and Rayner, a different strength. But yes, and you." He took the beer. "I don't drink to recover, Mr. Goodwin. I drink because logic is thirsty work." I raised my glass. "To logic." Wolfe raised his in return. "To the truth, however bitter." It happened 2 days later, in a courtroom that smelled of bleach and boiled coffee. Jordan Trestle sat at the defense table, looking less like a murderer and more like an underpaid accountant who'd missed his lunch. His lawyer, a nervous man with an aggressive mustache, was trying to argue that there was insufficient causation between the accused's actions and the decedent's demise. I was in the second row behind the prosecution, leaning back in my seat, watching Wolfe do what Wolfe does best: say absolutely nothing while dominating the room. He was a material witness today, called in to affirm his findings, his deductions, as the court labeled them with precision. He hated courtrooms, but he hated unfinished work even more. Kramer was there, of course, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Julia Montrose was present too, seated beside her attorney with a stillness I'd come to recognize. She wasn't here for vengeance. She was here to witness closure. The first few hours were procedural theater, establishing timelines, presenting the wine bottle, displaying Rayner's testimony on video. Then came Wolfe's appearance on the stand. He didn't offer dramatics. He simply walked the court through what he had already told us all: the forgery of the vintage, the poisoning, the role of Cale and Merriweather, the final twist of Trestle's fingerprints and cowardice. The defense tried to trip him up. "Mr. Wolfe," the lawyer said, "isn't it true that you are not a certified forensic expert?" "I've never claimed to be," Wolfe replied, "though I imagine I am cleaner and more thorough than many who do. And yet you make conclusive statements about guilt." "I make logical statements about guilt," Wolfe corrected, "which the evidence has a nasty habit of confirming." Kramer smirked. The judge smiled behind her reading glasses. The defense withered. But it wasn't Wolfe's testimony that broke the case. It was the lunch break. I was leaning against the vending machine in the hallway when I saw him, Trestle, flanked by 2 guards, headed to a side interview room. He caught sight of me and froze for half a second. That was all it took. The look in his eyes wasn't defiance. It wasn't even fear. It was relief. "Let me talk to him," I said to the guard. They looked unsure. I flashed my badge, not a police badge, mind you, just a laminated card that said Archie Goodwin, licensed investigator. But it looks good, and people tend not to argue with confidence. They let me in. The room was plain. Beige walls, metal chairs, no mirrors. This wasn't a noir film. Just a quiet space for things to unravel. Trestle sat down. I sat across from him. "You've got about 5 minutes before the lawyers come back," I said. "So you can either lie for the rest of your life, or you can do the one decent thing left." He looked up at me. "I didn't want to kill him," he said. I didn't respond. I let the silence coax more. I thought I could control it. That Cale would take the fall. That Merriweather would stay loud and obnoxious, and Rayner would vanish. But then Montrose died, and suddenly the script didn't work. "Why didn't you stop?" He smiled, faint and bitter. "Because I couldn't bear the idea that no one would know I was behind it. I wanted to disappear, but I also wanted credit, the perfect forgery, the perfect humiliation. You got murder instead." He nodded. "I never meant for Celeste to die. That was rage, panic. She was so certain, and so right, and I couldn't." His hands trembled. "And Merriweather, I wanted him to be the villain. Always had. He was so close to being one already. All I had to do was tip the scale." I leaned forward. "Tell the court. Make it official." He looked down at his hands. "Wolfe already knows. That's enough." "Not for her," I said, nodding toward the courtroom door. "Julia, She doesn't want revenge, but she wants the truth. Spoken. Don't make her finish this in silence. He swallowed hard. Then he nodded. That afternoon, Jordan Tressel waived his right to remain silent. He stood before the judge and confessed to everything. Calmly, clearly, without flourish, he admitted to the poisoning of Montrose, the murder of Celeste, the framing of Rayner, the manipulation of Cale, and the execution of Meriwether with a forged suicide note and a bullet he claimed was supposed to make things end cleanly. He said he was sorry. No one in the room believed he expected forgiveness, but it didn't matter. The silence after his confession was deafening. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just breathes. Back at the brownstone that evening, Wolfe was in his chair, sipping beer and ignoring the soft applause of the orchids. I came in and dropped the day's paper on his desk. Manager confesses in Montrose wine murders. Full testimony admitted. Below the headline, a photo of Wolfe in court. He looked like a sullen Buddha in a rumpled vest. "You're famous again," I said. "Phooey," he muttered. I sat. "Why do they always break?" I asked. "Even the clever ones, the arrogant ones, the ones who think they've engineered the perfect crime." Wolfe tilted his head. "Because murder," he said, "is an act of ego. And ego, Mr. Goodwin, is notoriously fragile." We drank in silence. The case was closed. The wine, at last, had cleared. There's a funny thing that happens after a case wraps, especially one as tangled as this. People want it to mean something. They want the papers to find a moral. They want the police to find a precedent. They want Wolfe to deliver some Latin phrase that explains why greed plus wine equals death. But here's what they actually get. A man shot dead in his penthouse. A woman poisoned in her own apartment. A sommelier silenced before she could say too much. A cellar full of ghosts. And a forged label that fooled everyone until it did in single quotes T. So, naturally, the city shrugged, called it the vintage murders, and moved on to the next headline. But for us, it lingered, like the smell of corked wine, long after the bottles. Gone. 3 days after the confession, I ran into Julia Montrose outside the brownstone. She was standing beneath a ginkgo tree, smoking a cigarette like it was the first one she'd earned in years. She didn't look shaken anymore, just older. In a good way, more anchored. "Thought you didn't smoke," I said. "I didn't," she said. "Until all this." I nodded. "Is it really over?" she asked. "As much as these things ever are." She looked up toward the brownstone window. "He's in there, Mr. Wolfe, as ever. He didn't even flinch when I asked for help. Didn't ask for money. Just did it." I smiled. "He does that sometimes. Don't get used to it." "I won't," she said. "Tell him thank you." I paused. "He prefers beer." She flicked her cigarette and walked away. That was the last I saw of her. Back inside, Wolfe had resumed his rituals with full devotion. He was knee-deep in a botanical treatise about rare Cattleya hybrids and arguing with Theodore about an air vent. "Too much circulation," Wolfe said. "You are drying the phalaenopsis. You are ignoring the mold, sir," Theodore replied. I left them to it. Fritz in the kitchen was zesting something that looked criminally French. He raised an eyebrow. "How's Mr. Wolfe?" "Happy," I said, in his own sullen way. "Good." I made duck. Of course, we didn't talk about the case much after that. Wolfe hates repeating himself, and I'd already filed a full report with the district attorney and the press. The story got picked up in London, Paris, even Tokyo. Something about rare wine and murder travels well better than honesty, that's for sure. Rayner disappeared again, this time with Wolfe's blessing. Kramer called to gloat about Cale's sentence 12 years, no parole. Meriwether's name got a full column in the Gazette as both villain and victim, which was about the best he could have hoped for. And Wolfe, he replanted 3 orchids and quoted Seneca to Fritz for a full hour before announcing, "No more cases this month," which meant I got a vacation. Sort of. But here's the thing about working for Nero Wolfe. You don't actually get away from anything. You just get time to think. And the more I thought about it, the more this case stuck to me. Not because of the body count, not even because of the wine, because of how it all hinged on one tiny thing. A waiter knowing the wine was wrong. If Celeste hadn't noticed, if she hadn't cared, If she'd just served the bottle and kept quiet, none of this would have come out. Rayner would be blamed, Julia would be ruined, and Trestle, he'd still be smiling in that smug little vest, moving forged bottles like chess pieces while corpses cooled behind him. But Celeste knew. She knew the bouquet didn't match the label. She knew something was off, and she said something. That's what cracked the case. Not Wolfe's orchids, not my shoe leather, not even the confession. A woman with a nose for truth. Later that week, Wolfe asked me casually what I would have done if we hadn't taken the case. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, I would have chased it anyway, even without your say-so. He nodded. You would have gotten yourself killed. He said, probably, foolish, he said. But correct, he didn't answer. He didn't need to. So now the brownstone is back. Too normal. Wolfe is reading philosophy disguised as gardening advice. Fritz is threatening to make me eat kale. And I'm back in my corner chair, filing reports and wondering when the next lie will show up wearing lipstick and a last name. That smells like money, because they always do that in this city. Someone's always pouring a glass they shouldn't. And if I'm lucky, I'll be there to sniff it first. 2 weeks later, on a Wednesday best described as sullen, the mail arrived with a thud that suggested bills and catalogs. I wasn't expecting much. Wolfe subscribes to 7 journals, none of which contain anything resembling joy. And I hadn't ordered anything in weeks except a new pair of socks and a paperback about New York gangsters that Wolfe called self-inflicted ignorance. But in the middle of the stack wedged between the Orchid Digest and an envelope from the gas company was a letter, no return address. High-quality paper, heavy, like something that should have arrived by Raven. I took it into the office. Fan mail, I said. Wolfe looked up. Yours or mine? Mine, if there's lipstick. Yours, if there's a threat. He motioned with 2 fingers. I handed it over. He opened it with a letter knife that could double as a bayonet and unfolded the parchment, with the same care he reserves for vintage menus. I leaned over his shoulder and read with him. Mur. Wolfe, I said I would never. Thank you, but perhaps this will suffice. The cellar has been cleared. The lock's changed. The bottle you asked about, the real 1953 Latour, was found behind a false panel. Unopened. Untouched. My father had kept it as insurance, or perhaps irony. I've donated the contents of the private collection to the Metropolitan Museum. Quietly. Discreetly. I kept nothing. Enclosed is something you may find amusing. No need to write back. Wolfe reached into the envelope again and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I recognized it immediately. Another cork, but not the forged one. This one had the original Château Latour seal, intact, with a wax insignia that had yellowed just slightly with age. Wolfe turned it in his fingers, smiled faintly, and set it down on the corner of his desk like a relic. Authentic? I asked. Undoubtedly, he said. It's been stored properly. The wax is original. The cork's density is correct. The vintage has spoken. So she found the real one. She found something else, Wolfe said. Peace, I let that hang in the air for a minute. Then I looked at him sideways. So, no thank you note for her. No, he said. It would be vulgar. Even I might have written a card. You are often vulgar. I grinned. True. Wolfe leaned back and regarded the cork again, then said something that caught me off guard. I underestimated her, Julia. Yes, she navigated the slaughter of her family name, the betrayal of her inheritance, and the collapse of her father's legacy with a restraint I had not expected. Sounds like you're giving a compliment. I am, he said. In my way. We sat with that for a moment. Then I nodded toward the cork. You want me to frame it? No, he said. Put it in the cabinet, top shelf, behind the Blashkas. Ah, the Blashkas. A set of delicate glass orchids Wolfe keeps locked away like sacred texts. If he was stashing the cork up there, it wasn't just memorabilia. It was history. That evening, over roast duck and parsnips, Wolfe offered a rare toast to clarity. He said, lifting his beer. I raised mine to justice. Fritz, pausing at the door, added softly, and to Celeste. Wolfe closed his eyes once, briefly. We drank. An hour later, after Fritz had retired and Wolfe had retreated to the plant room, I stood alone in the office. watching the rain smear the windows like watercolors gone wrong. The cork sat under the desk lamp, catching the glow in a way that made it look more valuable than any diamond. It wasn't worth much on the market, not anymore, but it had cracked a murder open. It had outlived the men who forged it, the woman who spotted it, and the schemes that tried to bury it. And in the end, it had returned, not to gloat, not to accuse, but just to rest from the private notes of Archie Goodwin filed under Case 5-1 to be. The waiter knew the wine was wrong status. Closed finally, culpable parties, one deceased, one disgraced, one imprisoned, and a sommelier who deserved better. Client, technically no one, practically everyone. This one's going in the files under cases we shouldn't have taken. But thank God we did. Not because Wolfe likes wine. He doesn't. He thinks it's petty and overrated, especially French wine, which he refers to as liquidized self-congratulation. And not because the fee was generous, because there was no fee. No. This one gets filed because every now and then, a case comes along that reminds Wolfe what justice actually looks like. Not the courtroom kind, the kind that knocks on your door in the rain, speaks with fear in its voice, and carries a cork in a velvet pouch. And more importantly, this one goes in the files because Wolfe was wrong. At first. Not often you see that. He'll never admit it, of course, not in so many words. But I've worked for the man long enough to know that when he spends extra time misting the orchids and doesn't ask me for the newspaper crossword, it means something got to him. This one did. Celeste Varney did. She didn't have a badge. She didn't have a lawyer. Hell, she barely had proof. Just a cork, a nose, and a gut feeling. And she came to Wolfe anyway. He tried to send her away, tried to ignore it. But the thing about Nero Wolfe is beneath the orchids, the beer, the ego, and the Latin quotes, there's a furnace. And when something cracks through all that marble and hits the pilot light, it burns hot. That's what happened here. The day after Trussel's conviction, I caught Wolfe editing the case file for his personal records. Not typing, editing. He uses a fountain pen and a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses that make him look like an angry librarian with aristocratic blood. I hovered in the doorway. He didn't look up. Just said, "Was there something?" "Nope." I said, "Just wondering where you were filing this one, under wine, or women who were right." He didn't blink. "Under obligations." "Huh. You'll add your version later, I assume." "Already have." He grunted. I turned to leave. Then he said, without looking up, "You performed adequately, Mr. Goodwin." In Wolfe's, that's a standing ovation. Later that week, the mail brought another surprise. An envelope from the State Liquor Authority. Inside, a request for Wolfe to consult on counterfeit detection procedures in luxury imports. He burned. I salvaged the ashes and taped them to the back of the case folder for posterity, labeled Wolfe's first and last job offer from the government. As for me, I've gone back to the usual rhythm, taking calls, screening clients, catching Wolfe muttering to the orchids when he thinks no one's listening. Life returns to what passes for normal around here. But sometimes when the doorbell rings a little too late in the evening, or the phone buzzes with that tone, I find myself waiting for another cork, another mislabel, another murder dressed up in etiquette. Because in Wolfe's world, death rarely shouts. It whispers. Through a bottle, through a lie, through a waiter who knows the wine is wrong.